What do we have here? 16-bit pixel art graphics, anime-esque aesthetic, turn-based combat, drop-down menus. Am I reviewing a JRPG? Well, kinda. Shadows of Adam is a JRPG-styled 16-bit indie game from 2017 which features very pretty to look at and deviously detailed pixel art graphics and animations, streamlined and smooth turn-based combat, and a solid score and pretty entertaining even if light writing. As opposed to other retro-inspired titles from the time, the Shadows of Adam developers decided to go with a more understated visual aesthetic. There would have been bits for more details to the pixel art, but I feel they wanted a more compact, almost Game Boy-esque quality to their visuals. The combat animations are generally cool to see and illustrative, with the final few abilities having some very flashy animations indeed. In order to further the retro feel of the game, there is the option of activating scan lines to give you something close to the experience of playing the game on a CRT. Is it the same thing? Of course not, but I don't know how many of us still have CRT monitors or even TVs lying around, so it's not a bad thing to have it in there. It doesn't take you long to get used to the gameplay features, from the many abilities your characters attain as you progress through the story to the various other things that you can do when outside of combat. I do have to congratulate the developers for designing some pretty easy to understand and use menus, especially for a person who hasn't played JRPGs growing up, or as an adult for that matter. You will be limited to the same 4 characters throughout the game's length, and you'll get the entire roster within the first 2 hours of the game. Unfortunately, you won't be getting a choice in how they progress, leveling happening automatically and your characters receiving new abilities at certain levels. However, what mix and matching you don't get in terms of progressing or customizing your party, you instead get when it comes to the actual combat. You can use healing abilities outside of combat, which is cool and highly useful, and there is one portion of the game where you have to navigate the city in the shadows, avoiding the guards who are looking for you. This happens towards the start of the game and is a mechanic that doesn't return later on, but it is fun when it happens. The combat system doesn't have the complexity of most other JRPGs, and that's not a bad thing. Sometimes one is in the mood for a more relaxing experience as opposed to an intense, or some might say a convoluted one. What makes combat a bit extra tough is that you don't see the character turn order during combat, and this makes planning out and optimizing your choices difficult. Can't be sure if this was a conscious design decision to make it more challenging or an oversight on the developer's side. However, what really makes combat fun is the monster weaknesses and how your party interacts with them. First off, in order to know the weaknesses and resistances of any given monster, you need to use the mind read ability of Curtis, who is sort of your monk character. The ability will reveal them to you, but you better write them down because the game doesn't remember them for you as well. Then it's down to how well you can optimize your party's ability use in order to take the monsters down as fast as possible, because you might have only one monster who is weak to a form of spell attack, but the only spell that supplies that attack is a mass spell that uses up 40% of your spellcaster's AP. Similarly, one character does slash damage, one does crush damage, and the other does pierce damage. But due to the limited number of characters and abilities, you get into a pretty clear state of mind and algorithm of doing things after a while. So much so that you might stretch out some fights just to replenish your character's APs, because oddly enough, Ether, the potion that replenishes AP, is something that you cannot purchase. Likewise, there's a bunch of other powerful potions that you'll find throughout the game which you will not be able to buy at merchants, so it makes a fair bit of sense in this one to save them up for boss fights. The boss fights themselves are pretty cool, featuring some very odd looking creatures, and oddly enough, the bosses will almost never be as problematic as the in-between bosses. There's a particular pair of characters whom you fight several times throughout the game, the team of Zack and Nick, whom initially I thought were a riff on Team Rocket, but after a couple of fights with them, taking in their comedic banter and their stereotypical body size, I think they're more of a tribute to the by now legendary Bulk and Skull of Power Rangers fame. Something else that needs to be mentioned when talking about combat is that the menu will always ask for confirmation on each character, of what you wish to do. And even after giving the confirmation, you can still return to that character and change the decision as long as you've not passed your turn. It likewise requires mentioning that the game does feature a fair bit of puzzle solving here and there, but nothing out of the ordinary in terms of challenge or annoyance. The majority of puzzles are basically slider puzzles, which shouldn't take you very long to solve, but there is one godforsaken lever puzzle which I think is in the game simply to piss me off, because I am the fuck lever puzzles guy after all. Fuck lever puzzles. The story isn't anything to write home about. It makes use of most tropes in storytelling and in the genre, from main characters who have had complicated histories with each other to childlike protagonists having daddy issues. All of these are steadily uncovered as you go through the very unreal story. I understand all of these could in fact be homages to JRPGs in general, which is fair enough. That doesn't mean I have to like them. That being said, the story is not bad, but it's not great either. The music is pretty cool and quite enjoyable, the only issue I had with it being that it would not loop seamlessly. Maybe it's just me, but I would expect purposefully composed music for a genre at least partially known for grinding to loop seamlessly. That being said, Shadows of Adam is only semi-grindy if you want it to be, because it avoids one of the main characteristics of JRPGs, and that is, it does not feature random encounters. You can see the encounters in the world and many of them are optional. Sure, these optional fights and puzzles will result in more experience and better drops, but they are optional. You can progress through the game without them. Granted, that progress is gonna be slower, but still, the option is there. The base game took me 14-ish hours to complete, with running toggled on. I say base game because there's also a DLC which I do not have, so I can't cover what it adds to the game. While combat isn't easy per se, it is highly unlikely for you to lose all of your party members for most of the game. The first time I was defeated was about 13 hours in, because I didn't know on which enemy to focus, but in general you will need to use those potions you've been stocking up on from time to time if you want to progress smoothly through the game. Unfortunately, once you're finished, there is no new game plus option, unless you have the Guild of Artificers DLC, which adds this new game mode as well as a bunch of other cool features like a battle arena, artifact crafting, a black market, and a bunch more extra content. So while I enjoyed the game's smooth gameplay and streamlined everything, I can only suggest you get it alongside its DLC when it's on sale. I have a playlist on screen where you can find my videos on other RPGs. Thank you very much for watching. I've been StefaNonsense. I have a Patreon. Have a great rest of your day and see you in my next video.